I don't worry so much about it. I do think that there will probably be a market for AI art. People who actually value it, think it's cool that a program can create something beautiful. They can maybe create custom pieces with some inputs. But I don't think that will necessarily replace the traditional form of art created by an individual, because I think people, when they buy art, they still do really value the story behind the art, the fact that it was made by a hand of an artist, that idea that the piece has a soul. I think it still is what connects with people on a deeper level. So I think that there will be a growing market of AI generated art, but I don't think that will necessarily cannibalize the traditional market. I'm a bit of an optimist on these things, but that's at least the way it kind of makes sense in my head. And last point on that, I think on the flip side, and Shanti talked about this, I think AI is going to help with artists just with their process and help them be more productive. So I mean, the fact that you mentioned that you use AI to help with your artist statements, I think that's a great example, with writing, because I know often for artists that's not necessarily their forte. And even things like, I don't know, helping, even if the output is not AI generated, you can still use AI for conceptual drawings and help give you ideas for a piece that the artist composes. So it can help with that conceptualization, that visualization process, which ultimately I think can lead to more interesting, complex artwork. So I don't think it's something to fear. I think it's just like any new technological advance, it's another tool. You got to figure out how to incorporate it into your toolbox.
Absolutely. I'm not totally afraid of it. I don't want to make that clear. I'm not. I do see a lot of value in it. I'm afraid of who uses it and how, like any other technology.
Yeah, I do have something to add to that, because I recently read an article, I'm not sure from where, but a white guy decided to make a model of a black woman and put it in magazines and whatnot. So now he's selling the identity of being black as a woman, but none of the experience making money off the image. So I agree with you.
Or the idea of misinformation, right? I mean, we work for TikTok, right? And so misinformation is huge. Remember when the AI generated the Pope in what was it, Balenciaga, like the big Balenciaga white coat? So no, you see what I'm saying? I thought that was real. So there was a picture of the Pope that was created by an AI generator of the Pope in a Balenciaga like huge puffer coat walking down the street, almost like a paparazzi shot, like Kim K or someone, right? And so it went viral. And what that does to our, whether it be political, religious institutions, has real life impacts on us as people. And so I do think like we have to be aware of who's using the technology, how it's being used, and then what narratives or either tropes is it going to perpetuate for us, especially as people of color, or for institutions that really are determining well-being of our lives, right? So I think that's where it comes from, but totally do agree that like any technological advance, we have the opportunity to do good by it and to do well with it and for it to aid our lives. I mean, AI handles my money, like my bank account, right? Or the credit card, or even thinking about our AI, how I got here. I use Google Maps to get here, right? So I definitely think like it can help us, but we have to be mindful of that component of it.
Spot on. I appreciate you all, because I don't have to do much moderating. Y'all moderate me yourselves. The questions. But I think this point, and we're going to touch on some of the ethical considerations among other things in a moment, but really thinking about the boundaries of traditional art, because we're kind of bumping up against that right now. We've discussed technology quite a bit. We've kind of seen some pros and cons, but I'm curious now, how can artists, and I would love to start with Shanti on this one, use technology to push boundaries of traditional art forms and create new innovative works? So how can we use this tech on more of the positive side?
The number one thing is research. Like, it compiles as much information as it gives us, but then if we're following the trail and where we want the, not just the digital, but the analog extension of that, then we have to follow, okay, such and such, who decided to give me the oral history? Let me record the oral history of the person, as opposed to don't just take it as face value, but going deeper to that next level. How does it affect the culture? Going to the culture, as opposed to just saying, the technology gave you this. How deep can we manage to use it in that point?
Anyone else wants to chime in as well?
Yeah, I think, you know, with NFTs, I mean, that basically what that has enabled is for digital art to be, I guess, more actively traded. And so that incentivizes artists to make digital art more, which I think is a great thing, because I think, you know, digital art can communicate, moving images can communicate something different than a static image. And I think there's still some issues to sort out with the NFTs. Personally, I think it has to do with like the display of them, because people don't want to look at, you know, art on the phone. And then also just the archival nature of digital art. Okay, if I buy a piece of digital art, is that going to be around 100 years from now? Like this piece will be, if I buy it, you know? And I think for people, when they buy art, they're thinking about that, whether they say it or not. I was gonna make one. Oh, yeah, I've seen some other interesting art forms created from technology. So, like related to like visualizations of science. So there's like an art tech house in DC. I went to an exhibition there last year, and it was all about visualizing the brain and what happens. They had a few different kind of pieces of artwork in the exhibition, and one kind of visualized the brain like over a lifespan to see like how the synapses develop. And then there was another really interesting one that visualized what happens to the brain as a result of addiction, whether it's from alcohol, other forms of addiction. And that was really powerful to see, you know, what happens to the brain when it's repeatedly, you know, subjected to substances, you know, or addictive behavior. So I think that that's a really interesting application of technology in art. You know, artists working with scientists to visualize these things that scientists are trying to communicate, because, yeah, to really move people emotionally, that's the gift of artists, right? You know, it helps to bridge that gap between what could seem boring and kind of stale or in a scientific paper versus what is visual, what is experienced, you know. So I think that, you know, that was a really powerful experience for me. And so I hope to see more of that sort of thing.
Did you want to add?
Also, there's this thing, digital galleries. Instead of being able to go to a gallery, you can go online. If you manage to have a VR helmet, you can experience the gallery without having to leave your house. It makes for an interesting concept that if every Black gallery or all galleries across the world decided to come together and have an entire one single door that linked every gallery, you could follow the process without ever having to leave the house, bridging communities, bridging culture, like the concept of that, like goosebumps.
No, it's dope. We have to make sure that our communities have access to the tech, right? Especially the headsets. I think it's so powerful. I'm a huge fan of VR. I started to use it in my history classroom to be able to explore like different times and historical narratives for my students. I taught at my latter years in teaching, I taught at a wealthy school, and so we had access to these headsets. Then I thought about the school that I taught at in Flatbush on Church in Nostrand, right? It was like my kids didn't have access to this, so I had to use different things, like maybe even using AR in their phones, right? And being able to have, whether it be QR codes or scans like that. So I do think it's important that we do leverage, and it's dope to have that. how do we get the Black community there is the question. How do we put the technology in our hands? How do we expand our knowledge base to be able to say, yes, you can access all of these, and I think that there's generational wealth in collecting, right? And so how do we get more Black buyers? But in order to do this, which is the money and the resources has to be there, right? And so that's always the first step for me. It's like, how do we start that?
There is a maker center out in East New York called Universe City, and they do have kids come in and they teach them how to use the VR helmets, and they get funding and whatnot to bring in the Brownsville community. So it is happening.
What is it called?
Universe City. Universe, and then the word city.
So, unfortunately, I don't know how we moved through 30 minutes.
That was all.
That was crazy. I was
We got
like,
time for maybe 2 more of the moderated questions.
yeah, so we'll do 2 more moderated questions, and then we still will have time for audience Q&A
Yeah,
thereafter.
for sure.
I was like, whoo, that flew by.
Yeah.
Clearly I'm not managed time out anymore. Just kidding. So I do want to kind of close out that conversation on the ethical pieces, just to kind of run out our conversation, and I'll close this out with more of a high-level question. But as Braylon mentioned, we both work at a social media company here in New York. It's a fun one. And one of the, so I work on the child safety team in particular, and one of the considerations we're always thinking about is like, what are the ethical limitations of policy making, right? So we can write all the content moderation policies in the world, but what are the ethical guideposts that we're following? So to the point that was made by Braylon, a lot of our work was written by folks that don't reflect our experiences, right? Braylon works in a very particular portfolio around like the sexualization of youth. And how is that defined? Who gets to say what is sexualized? Bless your heart for doing that work. So kind of thinking about these ethical considerations, and I'll start with Braylon, I can move around the entire panel. What ethical considerations arise in the use of technology and fine art, such as issues of ownership, copyright, and our favorite one, privacy, which I'm sure you're hearing about all the time at work. Every day.
This is a good question. You know, I think on the way over here, my dear friend helped me. Thank you so much, Mel. I did a curating course with the 70s Institute, and one of our big things that we used to unpack are copyright laws, what that looks like and what that is. And so there's like 4 copyright and fair use laws, right? And so there's like 4 points in fair use laws that you have to kind of abide by, or that we abide by right now. And so I think ethically, when we think, at least on the copyright piece, we have to think about, our copyright laws are not covering AI right now, at all, period, right? Like, that's something that just is not legally considered or covered. So I think that's something that has to be written into law, and so if someone in this room wants to do that, you know, please go ahead and start. But I do think that we have to start thinking about what a copyright looks like. Who owns AI imagery? When you wrote your ChatGPT, right, you're the expert. ChatGPT just helped you write your artist statement. But the way what you inputted into it allowed it to formulate these. Is that your work, or is it AI's work? Right? And so, yeah, we have to think about what that is like in copyright law, because copyright is all about like transformative, what's transformative about it, right? So a piece has to be transformed in some kind of way in order for it to be considered protected under this copyright law. Was that transformative, right? Yeah. So you have to, yeah, it was. So we have to think about what's transformative about that. So that's the piece on copyright. That's a whole other conversation we could have a whole panel about. In terms of privacy and ownership. Yeah. The ownership piece, I definitely think like we still own it, right? And I think that we can continue to own that around in tech. Am I answering the question? Can you repeat it for me?
Yes, I will. Absolutely. The question was, what ethical considerations arise in the use of technology and fine art, just issues around ownership, copyright, and privacy?
Yeah, so I think the first consideration is who is the owner, who's the proper owner,
Yeah.
right? if that owner's work is actually theirs, which is covered under copyright and privacy, I mean, yeah, how are we building that into tech policy? Who's creating tech policy? I think that's important, and the most important thing that I think I've learned in these roles, who is actually creating our policies in tech? Their experiences matter, their identities matter, because they have to have a lens and a scope that is global to be able to draft policy that considers global identities.
Can I
Please.